welcome to episode 34 of the Fashion Feed podcast. I'm Elizabeth, your host. I'm a fashion brand consultant and work with independent brands on their marketing and manufacturing. Today's guest is Fran at the Pattern Room London. Fran and I have followed each other on Instagram for months and share a lot of the same clients, so we thought it would be a good idea to have a chat on the podcast about all things pattern cutting. This is an essential part of the sampling process which enables the sketch to transform into a 3D garment. Fran's experience in the industry is very impressive, having worked for brands such as JW Anderson, Shrimps and Illustrated People. Fran now owns the Pattern Room London, which is a sampling studio in South East London, working with independent brands to bring their samples to life. In this episode, we discuss why pattern cutting is a key process to go from sketch to garment, Fran's experience in the industry so far, how she supports independent businesses in the sampling stages, tips on how you can start pattern cutting at home, and common mistakes she sees when working with clients.
Yeah, so I'm Francesca Magorti, full name, and I am the owner and studio manager of the Pattern Room. We are based in South London, Deptford, and we deal with mainly startup brands. And we do pattern cutting and sampling. They're our main, bread and butter. But we also can do things like tech packs and CAD drawings and grading and things like that. It's mainly for that link between the designer and before going to manufacturing. For example, if you are a startup, you don't usually have, you can't usually employ everybody that you need to get to that point. So we're kind of like a one-stop shop that does everything to be able to then send you on your way to manufacturing.
Yeah, that's amazing.
In a nutshell.
And so how did it come about? Like, what's your background?
So I went to uni and studied fashion design at Liverpool John Moores. Absolutely loved it. But my first role was at Paul Smith as a technical designer, and I quickly learned there that I was very more into the construction of a garment rather than, it came more naturally to me, let's say, than sitting there designing, because I just designed stuff that I would want to wear, but no one else might necessarily want to wear it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
From there, I went into product development, again with the construction of a garment, sourcing trims and fabrics and things like that, which was a very interesting role because it was more of a technical garments that I was dealing with. It was for Regatta, so like a lifestyle brand. Yeah. I think I was there for about a year and decided now's my opportunity to try out design in a design role, just because that's what I had always wanted to do from the age of 7, apparently.
Yeah. It's so funny, isn't it, when fashion just like clings to you and then it doesn't go away.
Yeah, my mum was always like, you're so lucky that you've always known what you wanted to do. And I think I do take it for granted a little bit. But yeah, and then I ended up working as a designer for 2 years. But as I mentioned before, it just didn't come as naturally to me. And it was more designing for a client that I didn't enjoy. And so I went back kind of to my initial roots. And what did I do after that? Oh, I worked in a factory up in Manchester, Cooper and Storebrand, for about 2 years, I think it was. And that was an absolutely fantastic experience within, seeing how the factory works, how, even down to the pattern, how that needs to be ready for production, not just, so you can whip something up at home. It needs to be able to be read by every machinist of every different kind of language. So it's more about like the notches and things like that, and everything had to be correct. And there was also a fantastic pattern cutter there who unfortunately has passed away now, but I learned so much from him, and that was just a brilliant experience, and has kind of led me to where I am today. Because again, it was just becoming more apparent as my career was going on that the construction side, the garment tech, the technical side of it was just more of an interest to me. From there, because this was all based up in the north, so I moved to London, which I put off for years because I just thought it was scary and you know, didn't really want to move down here. Absolutely love it now. Wouldn't want to live anywhere else. But yes, moved down here because I think my skills have always been geared towards luxury fashion, and there isn't that much outside of London. There's a few places, but I was finding it difficult to kind of progress in my career. So moved down to London and worked for JW Anderson as the garment tech, headed up the garment tech position because it wasn't there beforehand because they were still relatively new. Massively enjoyed that. And then it came to a point where I felt like I needed to do something more for myself. So I went freelance as garment tech and pattern cutting, which, you know, thanks to the network that I'd already created from my career, really grew. And then ended up just thinking that there seems to be a little bit of a niche missing between, I mean, I would be doing patterns for, you know, startup brands, but then they would take the patterns and then not know what to do next with them, kind of a thing. And I was thinking there's more of there's a bit of a niche and a missing bit in the market for that link between the designer and the manufacturers for startups. So yeah, created the studio, and we're a year in now. Yeah.
Brilliant. That's so interesting. I didn't know any of that. I saw a little bit from your LinkedIn that you sent me about JW Anderson, and but that's, I also think with pattern cutting, I was saying to this guy yesterday, I feel like it's a bit of a dying trade, but like it needs that like injection of newness and young talent, and there you are doing it and bringing it to London and bringing it to all these like independent businesses that need your services, because he was kind of beating himself up that he didn't understand it, but I was like, people go and have a degree in pattern cutting.
Yeah.
Don't feel like you
it's what I love about it, that I will never know absolutely everything about pattern cutting. There's always something to learn. There's always a different way of doing something. And I think that's the interest to me of finding the best way to construct something and how it translates from the pattern to a garment. And yeah, it's years of experience. And because like I work with some students sometimes, and they'll bring in the patterns they've done, and I'll just be like, I'll have to correct their patterns before I cut anything out, because they haven't got that experience yet, if that makes sense. Like, yeah.
And for anybody that kind of doesn't know what a pattern is, what's the point of it? So you start with this drawing, and I like what you said earlier, that it's for people all around the world, no matter what language you speak. It's almost like its own language.
Yeah, it's all because what I learned at the factory so I'll start with your original question.
No, sorry, I just like fired about 18 questions at once.
The pattern, it can, you know, these days it can be done digitally, and we do it manually on paper or card. So it's like a jigsaw puzzle to create a 3D garment. That's the best way of explaining it, I think, if someone doesn't know what it is. But obviously, the more complicated the garment, the more complicated the pattern. Like a t-shirt it is a little bit more simple than a tailored jacket, for example. And there's things along the way that you need to learn, like you know, ease in sleeve heads and things like that. So it's not necessarily a jigsaw puzzle that fits together perfectly. It might have, you know, an excess on one side because it needs to be eased in when sewing, etc. Probably getting a little bit too complicated.
No, not at all. But like, yeah, even down to the fact, like, wherever there's a seam in your garment, that's a separate pattern piece.
Yeah.
So like the front panel of your t-shirt is one pattern piece, like the neckline is another pattern piece.
Yeah,
like you say, if there's
yeah, exactly. And then I can't remember what the next question was.
It's like, so it's its own language that people can understand worldwide.
Yeah.
So when
for sampling and things like that, it's not as bad. Well, no, it's kind of hard to explain. So a sample pattern in my head should always be able to be translated into a production pattern, and the difference is, on the production line, each machinist won't be given the pattern. They are just given the fabric panels to then start sewing. they can obviously ask and refer back to the pattern if they need to, but there's no point in printing off, hundreds of patterns for each machinist per style. So, for example, notches in the fabric show you where they line up with other pieces of fabric. So like I said, it's kind of universal. For example, 2 notches next to each other, about 1 centimetre apart, usually refers to the back of a garment, whereas 1 notch would usually be the front of a garment. Yeah. I know I have got a friend who's a pattern cutter in Spain, and she said they do it the other way around, so I was like, that's interesting. But it's little things like that, and you'll have the little holes in the pattern where it's marked onto the garment, for example, where a pocket position is, things like that. And like I mentioned before, it's readable for anyone who's sewing it, which is quite a nice thing, really.
Yeah. And what if you're brand new, starting out, you've got an idea of what the kind of things you want to look for, you've roughly sketched it, what's the next step from there? Would you say starting a pattern from scratch, or maybe going to somewhere like John Lewis to buy a pattern and then tweaking it to make it look like your sketch?
From my side, I never usually buy in patterns that are done, elsewhere. Again, that's just down to an experience thing. I started off sewing by using those patterns, and they're brilliant and they're fantastic. But from our side, we usually ask clients to send in either hand sketches, tech packs, photos of garments. For example, if they've got a fit that they like have a picture of, and they want to change the sleeve, and they give us an example of the other sleeve that they want, that's absolutely fine. And the other side is we also, if they have garments of the fit that they like, we would ask them to send that in, because it gives us a head start of the exact fit that they want. Basically, we're quite flexible in that side, whereas if you went to a factory, they'd want, if they were starting from scratch, they'd want a tech pack, they'd want measurements, they'd want a hell of a lot more information, whereas we're the people that can get that information for you, again, before going to manufacturing.
Yeah. And so you do the tech pack, the pattern is almost like lifting it from 2D into 3D and making that garment ready to then go into production. What are the common sort of mistakes that you see people making? So when you said you see students bring in their patterns and you have to sometimes trim the edges or fix things, what are the common mistakes people make when they're trying to cut their own patterns?
When they're trying to cut their own patterns, I guess seam allowance. If you're a beginner, seam allowance is a big thing. People just sketch out or draw out their exact pattern, and they don't add the seam allowance. And then when it's cut out of the fabric, it obviously gets smaller because you have to sew up the seam allowance. I would say that's probably a common for very, very beginners. And again, a lot of that is seen on student patterns that I've seen. And notches, again, I'm such a stickler for notches because I know how important they are.
Yeah. Well, they're kind of like your stepping stones, aren't they, to put it together?
And I'm very much, when I sew, because I only sew the toiles in the studio. I actually have a machinist who does the sampling, just because she's absolutely amazing. And I'm in awe of her, basically.
Yeah.
When I'm sewing the toiles, don't get me wrong, I will know the pattern because I've usually done it. But when I'm sewing them, I prefer not to look at the pattern. I'd prefer to just get on with the sewing, so all the notches are there for exactly where I need them.
Yeah. And what are this is purely my own selfish question now, because I told you before we started recording that my sewing machine is in the garage. I think what overwhelms me is the order to put, how do you know what order to put a garment together in?
Again, I'd say that's probably experience. And a lot, as a beginner, a lot of mistakes are involved. A lot of unpicking and resewing.
Yes, my university days, I literally just remember sitting with a stitch unpick, gossiping to my friends because I wasn't concentrating when it was going through the machine or whatever. But,
unpicking, it takes a lot longer than you think. It's just the bane of my life. I never have to. I still have mistakes now. I'm not perfect, and I'm sure other machinists do as well. Yeah, I guess
like how long is a piece of string? I guess it depends what garment it is. And
I guess if you are a beginner and you're getting patterns from John Lewis, etc., there are instructions in there. There's an instruction manual, so you do learn that way as well, how to put things together. And I think for me, it's probably being in the factory as well.
Yeah,
all the process of, because there'd be a girl sitting there sewing pockets all day. That was her job. She was a pocket hand, so she'd know all the different types of pockets, and that's all she'd do all day, and that was always the starting point. So for me, whenever I sew anything pockets, I always do pockets first. But you don't necessarily, there's no rules to it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I would always start with pockets, but someone else might not necessarily start with that section. So,
and when we spoke before as well, you said that when clients come to you, they're always like, where can I get it manufactured? Where can I get it manufactured? And just the importance, I know I do bang on about this a lot, but the importance of starting small and maybe even hiring somebody like a local seamstress to whiz up a couple of things for you based on maybe the samples that you guys have created. Putting those online and just testing that there is an appetite for your product.
Yeah, and there's even things like pre-orders and stuff that you can do beforehand, which I think is brilliant, because it gives that sense of a little bit of a limited edition, and you're waiting for something exciting. And you see a lot of designers, like especially startups, doing that, which I think is brilliant. And also, you won't be ending up with boxes of stock that you don't know what to do within a year's time, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But I agree with the manufacturing side. I mean, there's so many questions to it, like, you know, the quantities that you want and whether you want it UK based. I mean, UK is a lot better for manufacturing for smaller quantities, which would be obviously for startups. But there is the other option of using a machine, just a one machinist to make maybe 5 pieces.
Yeah.
And because the other thing is, you might want to edit the style as it goes along. Once people have worn it and given feedback, that, you know, there might be, I don't know, a sleeve length that you want to just shorten slightly, which can be done if you do it at that stage. But if you've got 100 pieces of that garment, you obviously can't do it to what you've already got made, unless you want to pay someone to rework them all.
Yeah. A bugbear of mine is when the underarm's too high and I can just feel it under there, and yeah, that's just a personal thing. On your emails, you said that people message you and say, can I just have a sample of this, and they'll send a picture. What do you say back to those people?
So I think from their side, they think they don't understand the process, basically, of how to get to a sample. So I have a standard template email that I send back to them, which explains the whole process to be able to get to the sample stage. But yeah, the majority of the time they will come back again saying, but I just want a sample.
You know what, I love an analogy, and what I say to people is, like, if I gave everybody a photo of a bowl of spaghetti bolognese, some people might put like spicy sauce in it, some people might use fresh pasta, some people might use dried pasta, some people might use corn mince, and some people might use beef. So all of them are going to look or taste completely different based on the image. But if you give them an image and a recipe, you're more likely to get it closer to what you actually want.
Yeah.
Without that kind of step-by-step guide, and even with the step-by-step guide, they'll still all be different. Like, you see it on MasterChef where they give them all the ingredients, give them all the instructions, and it still comes back completely different. But at least you're a little bit closer when you have got that step-by-step guide. Do you know what I mean?
I might put that in at the end.
Yeah, like
a bowl of spaghetti.
Make me this spaghetti and send it to me. How about that?
Yeah.
And we're obviously recording this. Oh, sorry, you go.
I was going to say, usually at that stage, I will say, let's book in for a phone call so I can.
Yeah, let me
I do find that a lot of people don't fully read the emails anyway, because I do send through a lot of information, so it's understandable. Yeah, so a phone call is usually a good way to sort that out.
Yeah, like make yourself a cup of tea and I'm going to give you a little lesson in pattern. And we're recording this in lockdown, in isolation. Hopefully it won't be too much longer before we're released. But I saw an article online the other day about DIY fashion at home taking this huge surge and people getting their sewing machines back out. Like, it's quite nice that during a time like this, people do turn to a creative hobby. And you mentioned earlier about making these sewing kits. What do they look like?
Yeah, so it's something that I've been wanting to do for such a long time, and it's like anyone with a startup brand, honestly, and if they're working full time, I don't know how they do it. I'm not gonna lie. So this thing, because of having the gift of time at the moment, I put more energy into creating sewing kits, and it's mainly for beginners. Obviously if you're an advanced sewer, fine. And it's one thing I found difficult when I was beginning to sew was understanding the drapes of fabrics and what worked with what, and you know how it could completely change a garment from like a heavy cotton to a silk, for example. So for beginners, I've created pack sewing kits basically, and I've just started with bags. So there's two options: there's a tote bag and there's a oversized bag, which weirdly enough I use every day. I was going to try and find it. I use every day and have done for about the past 2 years when I originally wanted to start this project. Absolutely love the bag. So involved in the kit is the fabric, enough fabric to cut the garment. There is the pattern, any trims involved, and any thread that's needed to make the whole thing. Along with the most important thing, I think, is the construction information of how to make the garment.
Yes, this is what I would need. Yeah.
Which for me, who can just, you know, it's already inbuilt in my brain, to have to try and put that onto paper was quite difficult. And I had a few people who are beginner sewers test it out first and, you know, see how they went with it and things. So, you know, it's all good. It's all good now.
Yeah, I bet that is really hard when you're so experienced in something to like rewind the information.
Yeah, it's bizarre, but I have actually worked in the past with a pattern brand called The Avid Seamstress, who are lovely, and she's in the past asked me to. She's given me a pattern and she's asked me to just write out the instructions of whilst I'm making a toile for the garment, which is quite enjoyable for me because it does give me a step back and think about how people who are beginner sewers or, you know, amateur sewers are going to envision and how to put it together. It's just quite a nice thing to do, really. So I kind of had a bit of experience doing it with that. She obviously words it how she wants to word it afterwards, but I just give her the steps and photographs and things as I go along. But with the lockdown situation at the moment, touching on what you were saying, I think it's the most exciting thing. Well, the one exciting thing that's come from it is people are being creative at home and they are using their time in different ways, and I think that's so exciting. And yeah, the DIY home kits seem to be a big thing. Like my friend's done one for making jewellery where she will cast it in silver after it's been made, and it's something that, I mean, I did it the other week and absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it. Just doing something creative that's not in my norm, kind of a thing.
Yeah,
and spending time doing something a bit more interesting than just watching Netflix.
Yeah, I think I mean, I don't know if you have already, but I think you will see a surge in people getting in touch, starting brands.
I was thinking about this, because they've got the time on their hand now. For some, especially if it's always been in the back of your mind, like the sewing kits for me, it's always been in the back of my mind, and I'd started work on it, but now I have the time. I've eventually put it all together. So yeah, hoping that people will find their creative streak.
And how can people buy one of those kits? Will they be on your website?
Yeah, they're on the website, and they are on. I've just started posting on Instagram today. Do I need to link, or do I need to
Well, what I can link your Instagram below, but tell people what it is. It's at the Pattern Room London, or at the Pattern Room?
At the Pattern Room London is the Instagram, and then the website is thepatternroomlondon.com.
Amazing. And if people are starting out, or they're looking to learn a little bit more about pattern cutting, they're starting a brand, they just want some samples made for themselves, how can people get in touch with you?
Again, same on either message me on Instagram or through the website. I do deal with some clients just purely through Instagram messaging, which is, at first I was like, this is so unprofessional. There's no but it's just the way of the world now, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. I'd say I spend, when my screen time comes through at the end of the week, it just makes me want to cry. But actually, I am messaging clients like a lot of the time. So yeah, it's all good. And any kind of like final words of wisdom from you about pattern cutting or getting samples made, or any other things you want to share?
I would say for the designers out there, make sure you know exactly what you want in your head. I think that's key. Projects for us take a lot more time if someone's unsure, or they want to. Obviously, you know, design changes happen, you know, once you've seen a toilet, for example, but to not have a clear image in your head from the beginning is quite difficult for us, because we're trying to get into your brain, and if you haven't got that image already, we're just clutching things from the air as we go along, if you know what I mean. And the other thing I'll say is go with your gut. I really do live by that, and I think you know, it's your brand, and if something doesn't feel right, don't do it or change it until it does feel right. Because if you want to enjoy the process of it, you don't want to have like bad feelings towards it. It wants to be enjoyable.
Yeah, because then you won't want to sell it as well. I have that a lot with clients. If they're not excited to sell something, it won't sell.
Because people buy into you as a person and the brand, and it's, you know, you want that story and that message to be exciting, and so that would be my advice.
Hopefully you'll have some listeners getting in touch if they're thinking about starting brands. Thank you
so much.